Al, in my quest, I have been absolutely entranced by the role of philosophy in illuminating religion, and your work in particular has been very important to me. However, I have friends who are believers in diverse religions, particularly in Judaism and Christianity, who would look upon philosophy somewhat askance as something that is almost over-intellectualizing and therefore trivializing religion. So let's take a step back. I'd like to come to you and ask you for your overview of the importance of philosophy for religion.
I can understand why people think that about philosophy. The history of philosophy since the Enlightenment has been one, for the most part, of either opposition to religious belief or else sort of ignoring it, or possibly a sort of condescending acceptance of it as what goes with people who aren't quite up to the intellectual level of a really serious philosopher. You know, that's been not uncommon. But the fact is, I think philosophy is extremely useful for serious believers in God. In the first place, it can help one understand how one's religious beliefs, how belief in God, for example, is related to the rest of what you believe. How are you going to put, let's say, what you think about science together with what you think about God? That's, of course, a philosophical question. Nobody's obliged to answer the question, but there's a natural tendency in people to want to answer that question. Secondly, as I say, philosophy since the Enlightenment has not been very hospitable to religion, generally speaking. There are exceptions, of course, but on the whole, there's been a fair amount of hostility. There have been lots of arguments thrown up, lots of objections to theistic belief or Christian belief. And it's the role of Christian philosophy, or of philosophy in the Christian community, or at least something the philosophical community can do for the Christian community, to look at these arguments and see if there is anything to them. It seems to me it's important for the Christian community that this be done, that Christian philosophers look at these arguments and respond to them.
What are some examples?
Well, for example, the argument from evil, the claim that it can't be true both that there is such a person as God, who is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-good, and also evil, suffering, pain, the sort of thing we find our sad old world so full of. There's also the suggestion that whether or not Christian belief is true, whether or not theistic belief is true, it's not rational or reasonable or sensible or justified or intellectually up to snuff in some way or other. There's something defective about it.
Now, you've worked in this area very extensively, so take me through that question. And if I can tell you that I have felt this way, that I have had theistic inclinations, which I will reveal to you. But some of my friends, particularly in science, I'd feel uncomfortable saying that, because they would almost begin to think less of my intellectual capabilities.
Right, yeah. Well, it's not uncommon to think that people who believe in God must be a little less intelligent, let's say, than the average one of, say, people who do quantum mechanics.
Right.
That's not an unusual thought. I think it myself, it's a mistaken thought. But I mean, I don't know whether it's mistaken or not. And of course, even if it isn't mistaken, that doesn't really show a whole lot. It's not that the smarter people are, the more truths they accept, nor is it the case that the smarter they are, the better they are at figuring out the truth about religion. No reason to think that's true at all. But there is this claim that, a claim that's been with us for a long time, that believing in God isn't proper or acceptable because there isn't sufficient evidence for it.
Right.
The arguments for the existence of God, and people always immediately turn to arguments when they start talking about this subject. The arguments, they say, aren't cogent. They don't really show that there is such a person as God. Even if they make it sort of probable, they don't support the belief sufficiently so that you can actually believe it, as opposed to saying, yeah, it could be, it's pretty likely.
Yeah.
And so that's been one of the most common objections. And here I think philosophy has got something very sensible to say about this.
How have you developed that thought? Because it's an important one.
Well, there are lots of beliefs we hold such that you can't hold them sensibly without having an argument or evidence for them. For example, suppose I believed that the first person to cross the landmass from Asia to North America, whenever this happened, I don't forget, what is it, 12,000 years ago, or maybe 20,000, whatever. Whenever that happened, was left-handed or had red hair. Maybe that's very unlikely. Was left-handed or first stepped onto the North American continent with his left foot as opposed to his right foot. It would be silly to believe that without having any reason or any evidence for it. Same for believing that there are, say, an even number of stars as opposed to an odd number. Nobody has any idea, and if you just believe that, I mean, there's something there's a glitch in you if you just think, if you're just dead sure about that there's an even number of stars. But other things we all believe without having argument or evidence. For example, that there are other people. I see you sitting here. Here's this body before me looking various ways and so on, and I, without even thinking, assume that there's a person here, somebody who thinks things, has feelings, who has beliefs, and so on. I do this automatically. I don't give an argument. I don't say, well, I've got a body and I think and feel, so probably any body like that is connected with somebody who thinks and feels. I mean, that's maybe not a totally hopeless argument, but it's not a very good argument. But the main point is people don't believe on the basis of such arguments. You just take it initially, immediately, and totally for granted from the time you're a baby that there are other persons, other centers of consciousness. There you don't need any argument. So in some cases you do, in some cases you don't. With respect to other minds, if you didn't think there were any other minds, then what you would be a solipsist. A solipsist is someone who thinks that he or she is the only thing that really exists, everything else being a figment of his or her imagination. And I one time met a solipsist when I was a young philosopher at Wayne State University in Detroit many years ago. I heard that there was a solipsist on the faculty, so I traced this down. It turned out there was a solipsist who was in the medical school. He was a university professor, which meant in those days that he could just teach any course he wanted to. So if he wanted to teach my course in logic, which one of the things I taught, he could just come and tell me that he was going to do that. I'd have to find something else. I would probably teach his course in surgery. I don't know if that'd be a really good idea.
Most students would have gotten a bad deal, I'm sure.
Yeah, possibly, right. Anyway, so I went to see this solipsist, and he was affable and friendly, treated me very well, considering that from his point of view, I was only a figment of his imagination. And then when I left, one of his younger colleagues took me aside and said, you know, we take very good care of Dr. So-and-so, because when he goes, we all go. So that's what a solipsist is like, right? Well, we're not solipsists, and we don't need arguments for there being other minds or for there being a past. We all believe there's been a past. According to Bertrand Russell, it could be that the world sprang into existence 10 seconds ago, complete with all our memories, all the crumbling mountains and rusting automobiles and all the other, so to speak, evidences of the past. It could have happened. How do we know it didn't? Can we prove that didn't happen? Well, I guess we can't. Are we at all inclined to think it happened? Well, of course not. But we don't believe in the past then on the basis of arguments. We just believe in the past. We're sort of, you might say again, hardwired to believe in the past. Well, so some beliefs are such that you have to have evidence for them to be rational or reasonable or sensible. Other beliefs are such that you don't have to have. And now the question is, which of these two groups does belief in God fall into?
Right.
Lots of people have just automatically assumed that you can't properly believe in God unless you know of such arguments or unless there are some good arguments. But why think that? Maybe belief in God is like belief in other minds or belief in the past. If God has in fact created us, maybe he's hardwired into us not only belief in the past and in other minds, but also belief in God, which would explain the fact that the vast majority of the world's population does believe in God or something like God. I mean, it's not as if, let's say, the natural human condition is that of the skeptic who says, well, prove to me that God exists, then maybe I'll believe. That's not the natural human condition at all. The natural human condition involves taking it for granted or automatically believing, or at any rate coming to believe that there is a person like God or something like God.